Good morning. Our last set of oral hearings in Leeds began with my saying a few words. Later that day, at one of the breaks, a woman who'd come to listen to the hearings told me she hadn't known who I was or why I should be saying anything. Something similar was reported to me later on in the day from another source, said by another attendee, and they suggested, I think more than that actually, they made it clear that I should begin by introducing myself and not simply assume that everyone knew. Well, I don't want to repeat that mistake, which has, I suppose, a certain arrogance about it, that everyone should know who I was, even though I didn't know who they all were. So let me introduce myself. I am Brian Langstaff. I am chair of this inquiry. I was appointed on the 8th of February last year by the Minister for the Cabinet Office, David Lidington, to chair it once terms of reference had been adopted by Parliament. So I consulted widely, and many of you here were involved in that consultation, and the terms of reference I recommended were adopted in full by Parliament, agreed to by the Scottish Government, as they were by the Welsh and on behalf of Northern Ireland. And that was on the 2nd of July last year, exactly 1 year ago. And that's when this inquiry formally began. Well, why should the inquiry be here in Edinburgh? You may especially wonder, when many of you in Scotland have already invested so much time, effort, and expectation in previous inquiries, statutory or not, independent or executive, that you might be forgiven for not wanting to contribute to another. Well, those of you who know something about my own background may suspect that there are personal reasons for coming to Edinburgh. I was born in Perth and grew up through all my school days here in Edinburgh, where my father taught, first in Penton Secondary School in Gorgie. That's just next to Tynecastle, for those of you who don't remember it. And then he went on to what was then the largest comprehensive school in Edinburgh, Forester, Corstorphine Way, where he became deputy head. And we lived in Leith. So I have roots and friends here. But the reason the inquiry is here in Edinburgh is not because of my personal history. It is a matter of principle. This is a UK-wide inquiry. Indeed, it is the first UK-wide statutory public inquiry to deal with how it came about that so many died, so many were infected, and so many more affected by their suffering, because blood and blood products cause infections which were not prevented or not quickly or sufficiently prevented. What the inquiry investigates has been called by many, in a phrase which deserves thinking about rather than simply just parroting, the greatest treatment disaster in the history of the NHS. And it deals with something that does not respect borders, but has affected all parts of the UK. Indeed, some of the evidence you'll hear in the course of the next 2 weeks is of infections which began outside Scotland, though the witness now lives here, just as some of the evidence in London is from those infected here who now live south of the border. It is truly a UK-wide inquiry. Well, as a result of infections, many suffer from illness or the after effects of illness, and others from the consequences of loved ones being ill. It's easier for you to come in person to an inquiry in Edinburgh than it is to one in London. This inquiry seeks to put people first, UK-wide, and tries to make itself more easily accessible to the public it serves. That's why we are here. And that you are here, in the numbers you are, with the press interest you have attracted, shows how right the principle has been. And whatever you may have thought of previous inquiries, you are prepared to contribute to this one. So thank you for that. Well, I've already mentioned two of the principles this inquiry lives by. Some of you may already have heard me set out the 6 central principles at the preliminary hearings last September in London. But those of you who did not make it there, somebody was saying to me just this morning they couldn't be there because they were away on holiday, will forgive me, should hear it, I think, because they bear repeating. So forgive me if you have already heard these principles, but they are central to what we do. They are putting people at the heart of the inquiry, UK-wide. Being as quick as reasonable thoroughness permits, paying proper respect to everyone's right to be heard, being as open and transparent as it is legally possible to be, listening to what is being said to it, and being independent of government and frightened of no one in the conclusions it may draw. I should add, here in particular, that it will draw its own conclusions, whatever may have been those of earlier inquiries on their own terms of reference, with narrower focus, less evidence, less resources, and in some cases less powers. I shall say a bit more about 4 of those key principles. First, I promised that the inquiry would put people at its heart. That we are here helps making it accessible to as many as we can reasonably can. But the way the room you're in is organized, I hope, makes a statement. The witness is center stage. You, the public, are directly in front of the witness. The lawyers are to one side, I'm to one side. The inquiry is not about them or me. It is about the evidence which the witness can give and the public which that evidence is addressing. There will be friends and supporters in the front row, and if the witness wants it, a family member or friend beside them to support them when they give evidence, and there will be occasions when a husband and a wife or a whole family will give evidence together, and that, in my view, is only right. There are rooms to the side where anyone who wants space during the hearings can find it, and the Red Cross are on hand to assist those who find some of the evidence or their own memories, which it stirs, difficult. But putting people first is about giving them time to contribute as much as organizing physical space. You know now that the inquiry will be here for 2 weeks. It may seem to you to be only 2 weeks. It will never be possible to hear orally from everyone who would wish to be heard in that way. But you should know that that is so wherever we take evidence orally, whether it is in Belfast, in Cardiff, in Leeds, or in London. We do not have the luxury of time, for people continue to suffer and die. But those who are not heard orally during this fortnight, and those in other centres who would like to be heard, but for whom there is no time for them to speak orally, will be heard, if not orally in sessions now, or during, or at the end of the inquiry, when there will be a further opportunity for quite a number of people to be heard orally. Then always on paper. Every written statement will be read. And the evidence of all those who have made or will make statements is of real value, whether or not they give them orally. This is a message which I stressed when we finished the hearings in Leeds, and before I had left, a couple of people in the audience there who'd been listening came forward and volunteered themselves to give statements. The more we have, the more accurate a picture, the more complete a picture we can draw. And please do not think that because it's just your story and because it sounds so much like other people's stories that you can't contribute anything. Every person is unique. Every person has something to add. And even if it just confirms what we have heard from somebody else, that has a value. So please do not undervalue what you can add to the inquiry if you have not already made a statement. Second, can I repeat what I said last September about paying respect to a person's right to be heard? Putting people at the heart of the inquiry must recognize that people have different perspectives to bring. Those wishing to attribute blame, those wishing to escape blame, those who wish neither but just to understand why what happened did, or to explain their actions. Those who received blood products, those who were transfused with infected blood, those who are patients, those who are doctors, those who criticize doctors, those who are deeply appreciative of the treatment that doctors have given them. All are people. All are entitled to be heard, whatever their perspective. And I would ask all participants to respect that entitlement. However unacceptable they personally may find some of the ideas or explanations or accusations being expressed. Third, and linked with respect for what a person may say, openness demands that the statement of a witness, redacted, blacked out if you like, where appropriate, be published when that witness gives oral evidence. Now, some of the witnesses you will hear during this fortnight wish to give evidence without their identities being known to a wider public than those of you here. I shall say more about that before each of them gives evidence. And the first will be our third witness today. But for now, may I just ask that you respect their wishes as best you can. The proceedings are live streamed, but the cameras filming in the room will not film you. And I must ask you all not to take photographs immediately outside the building, or for that matter within it, of anyone else without their permission. The press won't do so. Please do the same. And finally, I'm here to listen. Now, from reading all the witness statements and documents I haven't read them all yet. I will. I promise to do that, and I shall do that. But I've read a very great number of the 3,000 or so that we are currently expecting to have. And I know much more now than I did last September. And I knew more then than I did when the terms of reference were announced a year ago. And I'm grateful for that and for the education that so many of you have already given me. But I also know that there is actually much more to learn, and that the oral evidence heard here will be an important part of that. Well, thank you for listening. For me, I've said enough. We should now listen to the evidence. Thank you.